we're new friends, and I guess I would love for you to introduce yourself and your story for the audience instead of me butchering it and telling my perspective of it. So,
Well, I think I was summarized well from a introduction I got. What was it? Yesterday. I spoke yesterday outside Atlanta. And the woman introducing me, she was very generous and had all these accolades to say. But she says, the most important part about Sterling is that he's been a loser and he's owned it. And she went on to say he's not the kind of loser that crawls up in a corner and feels bad for himself, but the kind of loser that knows that every time he gets knocked down, he's got to get up again. And he's done that countless times, which, as great as the accolades are, is actually the reason why he's here. And, at first I was like, am I a loser? And I'm having flashbacks to grade school and everything else. But in a deeper sense, that really resonated with me because, I got fairly lucky early on in my career. I started a company with my dad out of my family's grocery store that we sold to this group in Silicon Valley where it became part of this like Apple Pay before Apple Pay.
Oh,
and
so what did you guys do?
So we had a piece of software that personalized ads to everybody shopping in a store. That's commonplace these days, but we were really the first ones to do it.
Okay.
And
so like a geotag almost?
It wasn't a geotag. It was more like, when you're shopping at CVS and they print out a receipt with 50 offers for you and it's super annoying. It was the first version of that.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Essentially optimizing consumer spending and the consumer experience, right?
Sure,
If we
actually
can
giving them
deliver
discounts while they're in the store.
Exactly. And so we got acquired by this group and became part of this group that had a biometric payment technology where it was a little fingerprint sensor set next to the credit card terminal. And you put your finger down as you were checking out of the store and your credit cards would come up, loyalty cards, just like Apple Pay, only no phone. And we got acquired because the fingerprint, a unique identifier, if we could tie that to unique content and material and offers, that's a very special value proposition.
Sure.
And the investors we had and that were looking at this thing were like, oh, that's the future. So we raised hundreds of millions of dollars. Matt, we raised over $550 million for this company.
Yo, that's crazy.
It's insane. It's an unfathomable amount of money. And, 700
billion
people, $500 million. Offices all over the world. We're starting all sorts of different divisions. And have you seen the movie Wolf of Wall Street?
Yep.
It was that. It was that in real life. Models in the office, parties at the Four Seasons, you name it, it was happening.
Sales team just going to work.
Exactly. Okay. And I'd love to tell you how quiet and humble I was in those days, but it was...
What's the age range that we're experiencing?
I'm in my early 20s.
Yeah, fuck, I guess so, man.
I'm in my early 20s.
How poorly I would have driven the boat through that, like those waves.
Yeah, and I thought like, oh, I'm the next Steve Jobs. And I'm just a matter of time until I buy my private jet and my private island, and I've got this business thing, not to mention life thing, figured out. And I'll tell you, we'd be having a very different conversation today had that company actually gone public and we all cashed in like we thought we were going to.
Yeah.
But what happened is our organic growth wasn't enough to keep up with the infrastructure we had built out.
Mm-hmm.
And when the housing market collapsed, we weren't able to raise more money. We can go into that if you like, but the short story is no more cash and the entire thing goes bankrupt.
How quickly did it turn and go south?
In one way, about a day. There was something happened where we know the bank accounts are running low. The investors had a deal on the table, which the board rejected. And that was the day I was like, this is not going well. Now we limped along for probably another 6 or 9 months before the bankruptcy court took hold of all the assets.
Sure.
But it was a little bit of a slow death after that initial reckoning.
What are I mean, at that point, right? Like in your
Hmm.
early to mid 20s,
Hmm.
I mean, how lavishly or do you feel your life is at this point?
Dude, I'm living the dream. I mean, I'm flying private or first class. I'm going on these fancy vacations with fancy people and going out to expensive dinners all the time. I've got the penthouse apartment. I've got the model girlfriend. I've got everything. And in a strange dichotomy, I had nothing at the
Right.
same time. Right, like I didn't really know myself. I didn't know the depth of who I really am. And so I went through all the motions I thought I was supposed to go through. Oh, people with money do this and they act like this and they have this personality. And I just like adopted these personalities from friends or from the movies or from, I don't know where I got them, but it certainly wasn't me.
Right. Right. So after that crash, right? And
Hmm.
then how do you deal with the death of that ego and that identity to be able to try again?
Well, this was where I think my biggest mistake was, is I actually didn't for many years. I pretended. People would say, "How are you doing?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm fine. I've got it figured out." Meanwhile, my personal bank account's running lower and lower and lower. My girlfriend breaks up with me at some point, and it really took hitting rock bottom where I'm in six figures of personal debt. Like I said, my girlfriend broke up with me, and I go from the penthouse apartment into my parents' house. And at that moment, I said, "Okay, I've got to come to terms with this thing. It's finally time to take it head on."
And so what's your next step between like having that awareness and
Mm,
then the next move? Like what's the foot forward to realize, okay, that's behind us now. We
yeah.
got to dig out.
Well, I was really lost. I didn't really know who I was anymore. I didn't have any of the money. I didn't know who my friends were. It was felt very lonely for a while. And this thing my mom said came back to me. Maybe you've heard the quote before. It's actually Robert Frost, but to me, it's always my mom. She said, "The way out is through."
Yep.
And
Yeah,
it
the obstacle's the
means,
way. I mean, there's a ton of
yeah,
options there within stoicism and everything else.
yeah, well, to me, it meant I've got to go through the things I'm scared of, I'm fearful of, I'm embarrassed about, and what I'm looking for is on the other side. And as I'm having this realization about this thing my mom said, I know immediately what scares me most. I'm afraid to speak in public. I would be afraid to have any conversation with people. Like, I think I was always
Mhm.
shy, but after this failure, I was pieces of a human being.
Now, did you get like a big ego bravado that came with the success that made you think you were confident in speaking in front of people, or was it always there?
Moderately. I was always nervous, but when you're riding on top of the world, it makes the nerves a little bit easier.
Yeah, man. Again, like I mean, I see how hard it is for young athletes or any of that, right? That
Mm,
at 22 to 25, you're making a few $1,000,000 and it feels like you've been on this linear progression your entire life. And the truth is based on the numbers, right? Like that's a three and a
yeah.
half year lifespan to play in the NFL or any of these other things. And it's really tough to disassociate that identity afterwards of perhaps the greatest thing I did in my life is over in my early 20s, especially if you're going to measure that solely based on income earned.
It's the glory days. And yeah, I don't know if it's the same for athletes, but I know my experience of that rock bottom was, oh, I had my shot and I blew it. I had all the money at a company level. We had all the patents, all the cash, all the connections. We had everything that
Mhm.
any recipe book of success tells you need. We had it all. And I blew it. And that was probably the hardest thing to come to terms with. And not to go too dark on you, but it was this decision point of have had my shot. I'm going to call this whole life thing early, or I'm going to go through it. I'm going to take my mom's advice and I'm going to do all the things that have scared me to death to do. And I'm going to start with the thing that scares me most, speaking in public,
Especially
public speaking.
speaking about
Exactly.
the wound.
Exactly. Yeah, and when I first got into speaking, I kind of soft pedaled some of the pain points and some of the failures, and now I lead with it, right? Like the very thing that I thought was my downfall and the reason I couldn't succeed became the pathway to success. It's really beautiful, and I'm strangely grateful for that life and business crash back then because it's
Well,
made me not only who I am, but I live a much more fulfilling life and do more fulfilling things.
I think that's up for us to manage the perspective, right? And that's
Totally.
what kind of comes with building the reality that you want to be in, is that if you're in
Mm,
control of perspective and can see the abundance and the growth and the opportunity in it, then you're always in the driver's seat and in the winner,
yeah.
and winning with it. But if you look at it as bad luck and I missed my chance and there won't be another and blah, 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 well, that'll fulfill itself too.
No doubt. No doubt. And, I found, I think I shared with you some of this research, but I'll say it again here for the podcast, is I found this research at the University of Michigan about discomfort. And they were studying all kinds of discomfort, physical discomfort, mental discomfort, emotional discomfort. And they found that the brain and body process uncomfortable things almost identically. So that means the pain of running a marathon is processed about the same in your body as maybe losing a job or
Mm.
breaking up with a loved one or stubbing your toe. And it's processed so similarly. You can take Tylenol and it will help you with emotional pain. It's
Oh, that's
wild.
fascinating.
Now, it just for all the disclaimers, right? I'm not a doctor. That's not a
No,
biohack.
sure.
I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
suggest anybody do that. But when I realized that, I was like, wait a minute. Where you meet discomfort anywhere grows your capacity to deal with it everywhere. This is a muscle like any other muscle. If I hunt discomfort in every area of my life, physically, mentally, emotionally, even spiritually, I'm going to grow myself holistically. And that from that point at my parents' house, that's everything that I've done.
Mhm. Um,
And I'm still doing, by the way. It's not like I've succeeded. It's a lifestyle. It's a
yeah.
practice.
I forgot what we did, what we had talked about, but I mean,
Mm,
have you dove into plant medicine?
very much so.
Okay. Yeah. It seems that the same vocabulary seems to follow those of us around who frequent the other realm.
Yeah, I
Um,
actually just taught at a ayahuasca retreat at Rhythmia several weeks ago.
oh, that's great. That's where I went down and did our first experience with Aya. Well, only experience with Aya
Yeah,
was down there.
it's wild stuff. I recommend it for most people, and I always say I'm not responsible for anything that happens.
You know, it's one of those that it seems, if you're allowed to just allow yourself to feel whatever comes up and not try to go a different direction, it's a
Mm,
pretty okay ride. It's
yeah,
that resistance to wanting it. Like, man, you can't get off of that roller coaster once you click the seatbelt down. And
yeah,
like, understand that the ups and downs of the roller coaster are what you signed up for.
yeah. You know what's really interesting to me is I think our life is exactly that, but we have some illusion that it's something other. Right? Like, oh, I don't have to feel those things. I can avoid the discomfort. I don't have to go through that annoying thing from years back. But the truth is that you do,
Yeah.
right? Like, if you really want to grow, you've got to go on that ride, the ups and the downs. And, the one of the most important pieces of discomfort, I think, is surrendering to it. Like not fighting it, not resisting it, not trying to get away from it, not trying to condemn it, but really opening to it, opening your mind to new ideas and new perspectives and softening your heart to any of those uncomfortable feelings that are there to let them pass through you and leave you permanently free of it.
And this is really what you speak on the most, right? And that's one of the reasons you and I connected, because as I was kind of sharing what my topics and interests are, we align
Yeah.
a lot. So why
Yeah.
don't you let people know about your book and kind of where you went with it and what it can help people with?
Yeah. Well, first, I took my own medicine. I'm right. If the way out is through, I'm going to do these things and see if my mom was right. So I end up, long story short, applying to speak at this conference in Singapore with no credentials, no speaking website, like none of the things that you would think
Sure.
you need as a paid public speaker.
Where are these websites that I can apply for these talks? I'm just gonna start
Any
putting
go to any event website. They've got a like
okay.
button that says, "Do you want to speak?" And what I received was a junk mail about attending as a conference, and I hit reply and I said, "Why don't you have me speak?" And I don't know if it was just good luck or meant to be, or the clouds opened up, or I just paid attention to the opportunities that were in front of me. But I talked this conference director into being the keynote speaker of his entire event, which is wild now. Being in the profession of keynote speaking,
Yeah.
I'm like, man, I really pulled the wool over that guy's eyes. And I practiced incessantly like a crazy person, and I was
Yep.
massively terrified, and I was sweating days in advance, and I went through all the symptoms of absolute terror, and I did it, and I thought I bombed. And he ended up putting me in touch with all of his conference director friends, which was really the beginning of my career that I have today. And I was like, my mom was right. The way out is through. We just have to go through no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
I love that, right? I know both of us, lean on discomfort as being kind of our guidepost.
Absolutely.
And I've found something with that recently that I'm toiling with.
Tell
Uh,
me.
so whether it's plant medicine or really any, you know, experience that I'm going to get a lot out of, especially if discomfort is what I'm going for.
Yeah.
I find myself, plant medicine, especially
Mm,
that like, unless that journey gets dark and goes somewhere unexpected and is heavy emotionally and gutting,
mm,
I almost don't find it valuable.
mm-hmm.
And that's a problem too, that like, oh, for me to be happy of this experience, I've got to bleed for it.
Mm,
And that's another hang up on the other side of like, maybe we can find some balance there a little bit, that like maybe good times are allowed to be good times and we can learn from those too.
yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. Well, to kind of bridge what you're asking me about the book and what you
Mhm.
just said, my book's called Hunting Discomfort. And oftentimes people will look at it, at least at face value, and be like, well, Sterling, look at my health, my relationships, my kids, my bank account, my business. Like they've got all these lists of things. And they're like, I'm surrounded by discomfort. And my answer to that is all the same, which is you're placating discomfort. You're rationalizing why you have it. You have excuses for why you have that discomfort in your life. What hunting discomfort is about, and I'd even go so far as to say the journey that we're on is about, is not living an uncomfortable life. It's freeing yourself from that discomfort, letting it kind of shed away from yourself to come to something that's really more true. And the more that I've done a lot of this work, the more I align with what you just said, which is I don't have to bleed to experience joy. The
Mhm.
joy is actually always inside of me. It's always here. It's just the discomfort that's gotten in the way.
Right. Right. And then, at what levels of stress and how do we manage it?
Hmm.
What I've caught myself recently is, man, I'm in a season of it where I'm going. Like
Yeah.
things feel good. I feel good about the direction and I'm on the gas. And I'm
Yep.
trying not to be a maniac about it. Like I try to describe it to people as there's kind of two ways to be on the gas pedal in life. And one of is I can push the gas pedal to the floor with my big toe and sit
Mm.
back comfortably in the chair. Or I can push it all the way to the floor with my full foot and stand on the steering wheel and pull as hard as I can. The car doesn't go any faster.
Beautifully said.
I want to keep it pegged, but be honest of like, hey, we don't have to freak out about how long it takes. The car goes as fast as it goes right now.
Yeah. There's a really big surrender element to it for me. Like discomfort alone is actually not enough.
Hmm.
Like you can't just be uncomfortable and then grow. You surrender to it, you open to it. So the things that were formerly uncomfortable no longer are uncomfortable. And I'll give you a great example is in my speaking. I mean, that one 30-40 minute talk in Singapore that I gave, my first professional talk, was terrifying and debilitating and crazy. And my whole life revolved around giving that talk for probably 3 months. I didn't have anything else going on. Lived at my
Sure.
parents' house, didn't have anybody, right? And now I can give several talks a week and more or less take them in stride. And I'm not saying I don't have any nerves, and I certainly do a lot of preparation. But what was formerly debilitatingly uncomfortable for me, I can now do with relative ease. And that's kind of the parallel of driving the car with your toe on the gas and sitting
Right.
back is, oh, I've actually grown the zone in which I feel psychologically safe. That's how I've grown as an individual.
Right. It comes with the repetition. Like I've kind of
Yeah.
always felt that, one of the ways to alleviate anxiety is through repetition and exposure and being
Yeah.
able to say, like, oh, we didn't die. And I mean,
Yeah.
I know for you having that major life change experience, right? That we'll call it the death of that first act.
Yep.
Mine was the end of sports. Yours is the end of this business that got built, and kind of had to face that reality of like, holy shit, we got a lot of life ahead of us,
Yeah.
and we can't undo where we're at.
Yeah.
Um, through that reaffirming and through that look back at it, to choosing to be nice to yourself and choosing to see what opportunities are in front of you and swallow that pill of ego
Yeah.
is a lot. It's a lot for people to have that discomfort and that growth that has to come from being able to say, oh shit, that's a thing I did. And it's not who I am. I'm still writing the
Yeah.
story of who I am.
Yeah. And to your point, it really takes something, to meaningfully shift a perspective isn't just a decision, right? Anybody that's been afraid of anything, let's just take public speaking because we're talking about it as an example. Like if you're terrified to speak in public, I've heard all the anecdotes around like picture your audience naked and don't look at the people, look at the back of the room. Oh, you're just excited, but you're interpreting it as you're nervous.
Sure.
You can't just change your mind about those things.
Right.
It takes actively proving to yourself through that exposure therapy, which I'm a big fan of myself, to shift your unconscious to really believe that that new perspective is valid, that what you've been through doesn't define you. It's something that you've done and you've grown from it. It's not just like a superficial mindset shift. It's really a shift in your fundamental beliefs.
And I mean, ditching that old identity, there's a big relief that comes from it on the other side,
There is.
which is that feeling of like, oh, we'll do this again, won't we?
Yeah.
This isn't the last time we're gonna have that feeling.
Yeah. I think it's like the hero's journey
Of
for all of
course.
us, right? I'm sure you've probably read some of Joseph Campbell's work. He wrote
Mhm.
about the hero's journey and he abstracted from all these religions and all these origin stories from all these cultures around the world, had a common theme of going into the unknown, unearthing something there, and coming back with gifts to share. And at first, I thought it was just a good formula to make a good movie or a TV show or something along those lines, because it is the kind of backstory or
Yeah,
the
it's a
inspiration
standard
for
archetype for everything.
everything. And I'm like, well, we actually live that every single day. Like, in order to grow, we need to step into that unknown, which
Yeah, I
is
mean,
for
like I've
just
got
about everybody uncomfortable.
yeah, I think all high performers, right, operate with the idea that the hero's journey is like I think rising to the occasion once is a moment of being heroic,
Yeah,
but a hero continues to slay dragons.
that's
And
it.
I've got daily dragons to slay and monthly dragons to slay and yearly dragons to slay and
You're right.
decadely dragons to slay. But it
Yeah,
requires that, my chance of slaying the decade dragon requires, what was my consistency in slaying the daily dragon? What was my
yes,
consistency in slaying that monthly dragon? And that's
that's
what
right.
prepares you for the bigger fight ahead. And
Yeah.
something else you talked about with chasing discomfort, and I've seen it time and time again too,
Hmm.
is how many people go into those experiences, whether that's plant medicine or retreats or deciding to look inward and get addicted to the going to find it and not integrating any of the information.
Yeah. Yeah, I think equally as dangerous and maybe just as common is the people that step into it and get scared and turn back.
Mm.
And one of the things that I found helps with both is making meaningful commitments where something's on the line. Fun way I write about it in the book is I call it getting a tattoo. Not a real tattoo necessarily, but like, how do you commit in ways where there's no going back?
Yeah, some way of burning the boats, right?
Exactly. Burn the boats, burn the ships, just commit in a way that forces you to move through that thing and integrate that thing in order to be able to grow from it. And the research is irrefutable when you make those kinds of commitments. Now, we're not talking about self accountability, importantly, because I think a lot of high performers, especially, lean on self accountability. And I'm not dismissing it. I think it's hugely important, but I think self accountability is really only reliable for the things that you're already doing. If you're committed to growth, you need somebody, you need something outside of yourself that you need to be accountable to, because when you're really in the thick of it, you're in the discomfort, you're in the pain, you're in the unknown. It really takes somebody to help kind of call you through it and remind you, hey, this is what you said. This is what you wanted to achieve. I get all the reasons and the excuses and everything
Hmm.
else, but where's the gap? And if
Right.
you can find somebody that will hold you accountable, not to like make you bad and wrong, but really out of love and support, it's one of
No,
the
no,
most
there's a totally
invaluable
different
people
thing.
in our
Yeah,
life.
there's
Totally different.
totally a different thing, right? And that's
Yeah.
what I've been able to see with coaching is, yeah, I got really lucky in those departments, right? That I got
Mm,
lucky that sports taught me a lot of those things of how to hold myself accountable, how to hear that mean coach voice in my head that's not the kindest to me, but I can interpret it the way it needs to be interpreted for me. I can
yeah.
switch that voice now to seeing it with love of what it's asking me to do is show up and be my best self.
Yeah.
It doesn't say it in the nicest way, but also I've proven to myself that that's the way I need to be talked to occasionally. Uh,
I think we all do.
yeah,
But it's the intention, right? The
right.
intention that is out of growth and it's out of love. And it might not sound the nicest, but the goal of that
That's
like
it.
harder voice that my mom would call it tough love, right? Is critical to growth, like something that's gonna, really true you up to your potential.
Yeah, I think it takes those pushes.
Hmm.
So as you've continued to lean in now, public speaking being, is this your main line of what you do for a living?
Um, I used to think about it that way, but now I think about what I do is I'm a researcher, I'm a writer. I want to understand human performance at a deeper level. And one of the places that manifests in a very big way today is speaking. So I'll speak 50, 60 times this year, something like
Mhm.
that, for groups of all sizes, ranging from 10, 12 people in a board to earlier this year, I spoke to almost 25,000 people in person, which was just wild. Coming from somebody that was terrified to speak in front of anybody, that
Yeah,
was a big landmark moment for me.
I bet, man. That's a big room of people.
Massive. And it's become one of my favorite things in the world to do, somewhat ironically.
Sure, right? Well, I mean, again, it's discomfort. There's no danger. Like we haven't killed someone for a bad speaking performance in a long time.
It's been
Like
a while.
there's a couple obvious things to maybe avoid when you're on stage to to get out of the room alive, but yeah, outside of that, it's discomfort, not really danger.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a huge line for everybody, all of us to understand. And one I keep coming back to is there's a very clear difference between something that's actually dangerous and something that's only uncomfortable. And when you understand the reality of what that danger looks like, you can start to calibrate your discomfort accordingly. One of my most fun examples is probably skydiving, which I was terrified to. You've been skydiving, right?
Not yet.
Now, oh, we got to get you out there.
It's it
So,
it's on my list. It's not like I'm avoiding it.
yeah, terrifying for me, especially the part where you have to sign like 16 different pieces of paper and do a video, a disclaimer saying, I'm doing this on my own accord. If I die, it's not this company's fault. Terrifying. But if
Yeah,
you look at the reality of it, it's actually way more dangerous for me to drive to that location than it is to jump out of the plane, right? That my
right.
view of discomfort and danger was skewed. And as
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can look
you
at
have
the
tons of
research,
experience driving.
exactly. But when you can get oriented to what the real actual dangers are, you can say, oh, this is just me holding myself back. Like there's no real danger here. This is me. And then you can choose to go through it or not. At least at that
Yeah,
point, it's up to you.
there's just a weird false flag that gets dropped that says we shouldn't do this.
Totally. Totally.
All your alarm bells are going off and you decide we're okay.
Yeah.
That, I think understanding that that voice has a tendency to lie to us.
Hmm.
Um, I don't want to ignore it, but I also don't need it to be immediate reaction. So
Right.
of the discomfort, like of those things like skydiving or any of that,
Hmm.
earlier this year, we had a chance. We were in South Africa with a group of people,
Hmm.
and we went and dove in, did a cage dive with sharks, and then we did like a swim with these seals.
Hmm.
And prior to going to it, right, the amount of people on the trip who were like, "Oh, no way, I'm doing the sharks."
Yeah. Was it at Seal Island, by the way?
No, 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 it wasn't Seal Island. So it was just off the coast in the Indian Ocean, or on the coast, I guess, like in Plettenberg
Hmm.
Bay, South Africa. But
Yeah.
the shark diving was really tame. Like you're
Okay.
in a cage attached to the boat, and the sharks are swimming around. They're chumming them.
Hmm.
Um, Zero sketchiness whatsoever to it
Okay.
feeling.
Yeah.
It very much felt like a Disney ride of discomfort.
Yep.
Um, Going to swim with the seals, like we didn't sign any paperwork or do anything.
Yeah.
And we put on wetsuits and they gave us snorkel and goggles and flippers and put us in the water. And the water is boiling with these like 3-foot seal pups. And they're
Oh,
like right
wow.
at this age that they're super curious. And all the big guys just live on land. They're also now
Hmm.
used to tourists kind of coming. And so, like, as we're floating there and hanging out, we have one guy in the water with a group of 20 of us, and we're just in the ocean in waves near rocks. And there's like a
Yeah.
boat kind of hanging out, waiting to pick us up when we're done. And
Yeah.
he's like, "Yeah, if you just put your hand out, like, they'll come nibble on you." And I'm like, "You're asking me to put my hand in the mouth of a wild animal." Like, the amount of
Hmm.
sketchiness I had doing that was so much greater. Like, it felt like there was very much a real feeling of, like, oh, this is loose.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Like if something goes wrong, I'm not sure they're
yeah,
prepared to handle
well,
that.
like this thing, if it wanted to remove my finger, it would, and it
Right.
would happen really quickly. And there's zero I could do about it. There's no one to
Hmm.
argue with afterwards and be like, "Oh man, you got my finger." No, I just don't have one from now on.
That's it.
Yeah. What of your experiences have been the gnarliest?
So funny enough, I dove, shark dove with uh, sharks at Seal Island. This is
Okay.
cage diving, right? But my experience was very different than yours. So it was probably similar for you. I thought it was going to be a whole tours thing, but it was not. It was like one
Oh,
boat. There's maybe one or two local fishing boats out there fishing, and it's three or four people that are on this boat. And we had signed some paperwork in advance, safety things and releases. But the one that came to mind 4 or 5 hours into this thing was, oh, this is why you sign the paper saying if you don't see sharks, you don't get your money back, because nothing was happening. Hours go by and Seal Island is full of seals and it stinks
well,
and
yeah,
it's
it smells like
really
powerful
hot.
seal shit.
Right. The African sun's like beating down on me, and I've got half my wetsuit on, like ready to jump in the water. And 5, 6, 7 hours of this, I'm done. I'm like, get me out of here.
Call it.
Finished. And so I'm sitting, eating a sandwich, totally resigned with my feet in the water, in the shark cage, of course. And they had done all the chumming, and the chum's hanging from a rope next to me. I'm not thinking anything about it because I've kind of resigned myself to
Yeah.
this isn't happening. And I hear all of this screaming. And what I realize has happened is what turns out to be like a 16-foot shark has jumped out of the water and is hanging from this chum, which I kid you not is 18 inches from where I'm sitting.
Oh shit.
And fear does not begin to describe that moment. Like I froze. I could not move. This
Well, because it
massive
doesn't
thing
make
was in
sense
front
what
of
you've
me.
seen.
Exactly. And it's shaking the bait. It's like I'm in Discovery Channel. It's Shark Week,
Right.
18 inches from me. And they're screaming, get in the water. which I think, what are you,
What is
insane?
that's a terrible idea.
Right. I want to be back in the boat. I want to be in dry land. Like I'm in this moment that I've flown halfway around the world for, paid a bunch of money for, waited all day for. And the moment happens and I'm ready to skip out and run.
Yeah.
And I took a couple of deep breaths, like I think we can all do when we meet that moment of discomfort. And I took their advice and I jumped in the water, and it became one of the most beautiful and peaceful experiences I've ever had. But I always come back to that idea of like at the moment that it's happening, I'm ready to take off.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yep.
And as soon as I made that jump, literally and proverbially, the entire experience was there. So that was definitely one of the more wild experiences I've been on.
So like that feeling, right? That feeling of
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm ready to bail.
Yeah.
Um, how have you learned to recognize that as like, oh shit, that's the way we have to go?
So I have body symptoms, right? Like I notice my chest gets really tight and my breathing gets a little shorter. And if I've got some time to think about it, my mind starts saying, well, you can't, you shouldn't. You'll probably fail at that. That's a really stupid
It's risky.
idea.
It's smart. It's going to ruin someone else's day. Like that's where I go.
It's going to ruin my day,
Yeah.
you
Right.
know?
Right. Right.
And I've come to really notice when I have those sensations, and I'll just flag it. Hey, this is something that I need to go after. This is something that I need to do. I don't always do it in the moment, but I do kind of keep record of it formally and informally of when I experience those things. That's a place where I'm holding on to discomfort. I'm
Mhm.
resisting discomfort, and a place that I can really go into to be free of it.
So do you purposely set stuff out on the horizon to go after?
I do.
And if so, how do you focus on it, and when is the point of we did it or not did it?
What do you mean, did it? We not did it.
Um, I guess are they pretty concrete, like what the goal is that you're going after, right? That like
Oh,
diving with sharks
yeah.
is very much a I know when I
Yeah.
did or didn't do it, but like if I'm pushing myself to expand my ability to speak, it's a little bit
Yeah.
more arbitrary of the goal line.
Yeah. Well, I try to make the things as concrete as possible. And because I know, we all know now that where you meet discomfort anywhere grows your capacity to deal with that everywhere. I try to have at least several things every year that are big physical goals of mine. One that I just signed up for is, do you know Greg Scheinman?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I know
Oh,
Greg.
that's right. Um, So he is getting a group together to do this thing called Everesting, where you climb the equivalent of Everest, which is
Uh-huh.
about 29,000 feet. Have you done it before?
I have not. I'm familiar with it. I know that you can do it. Are y'all gonna do it via a bike?
Uh, we're gonna walk it, and
Okay.
it's about a year from now. I think it's early September, and it's just you climb a mountain as many times as you need to climb it to reach 29,000 feet. Could be
Yeah.
8, 10, 12 times, but you take the gondola down, so you don't have
Okay.
to go both ways.
Yeah, so
And
with cycling, it became a thing in cycling during COVID that guys
mm,
would go out in Everest, and so you'd basically like
ah,
try to find a route that had the perfect amount of climb per, foot thing, and then they would chase it for time.
it's wild to me. I
Yeah,
mean,
and you
I
have to ride the downs.
well, that's not too bad on a bicycle. I did.
Sure, 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 right? But I mean, if you find a route that's getting 12, getting 1,000 feet every 10 miles, you got a lot of fucking miles to get 30,000. So
A lot of
it's an
miles.
interesting strategy of like picking the right place if you're chasing it for time, but just
Yeah,
doing it as the experience of it. I really like that.
yeah, yeah. Me too. Um, I've gotten into some cycling, but I'll look for things that test my physical boundaries.
Hmm.
And it's a place to what we were saying before. Like I'll think I'm capable of something, and I found that I've either vastly overestimated or underestimated myself. Sometimes I'll look at cycling, for example. I'm like, oh, I can climb that no problem. And it destroys me.
Yeah.
Or the flip side, I'm really scared of something and I surprise myself with how I show up. But either way, I'm continually looking for very measurable ways where I can push that physical limit. And to your point, I've either done it or not done it.
So how do you do the same, say, emotionally? I know that that's part of vulnerability and working and having a partner and working with a therapist or any of those things is kind of willing
Yeah.
to go into that dark as well.
Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with Gabor Mate at all,
Mhm.
um, but amazing therapist and psychiatrist and doctor. And I was listening to a podcast with him the other day, and he says, "You know what? Nothing in this world can grow without being vulnerable." He said a lobster has to shed its hard exoskeleton in order to grow. And even plants, it's not the hard bark area of a tree that grows, it's the soft, supple, fragile internal parts. And he says humans are the same way. And I go after it a couple of different ways. I mean, on one hand, anything that's uncomfortable taps into your emotional discomfort, right?
Mm.
It's almost like the emotion is the interpretation of what might be physical pain in some ways. But I talk about some of my darkest moments publicly. That's been an emotional outlet, freeing for me. That was very uncomfortable early in the beginning. Um, I do different kinds of therapy. I do plant medicine on a fairly regular basis. I'm a big believer in those things, done safely with the right groups
Sure.
and legally, and all those things. And I look for it inside of relationships as well. Like if I notice an inconsistency or a place where I feel like I'm protecting something, I make a point of exposing myself and say, hey, I was really thinking this. And I just wanted to let you know. Whether the other person noticed or not doesn't matter. It's
Yeah.
more a function of exposing yourself so you're not like closing in on something. It's
Well,
bringing everything that's in us into the light.
I love that a lot. That
Yeah.
I kind of look at it as we're hosting a retreat here in Montana pretty soon, and it's about
Sounds
discomfort,
awesome.
about Montana exposure, and so we'll do hot and cold, and we'll do
Mm,
a hike and do some outdoor stuff as well as journaling and some workshopping, and
beautiful.
yeah, it's about finding the rest of you that's hidden underneath, like the way that 10% of the iceberg is all that's
Mm,
poking through the surface. And it's not until we dive down into the dark that we get to see what we're really made of,
yeah.
and kind of giving people a free, safe space that is supportive to go in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think to what we were saying earlier is it's a practice. You do it, you do some of these activities, join you on this retreat that you're doing, and then you integrate that. But then it's a matter of going back to the well and, okay, well, maybe I've found something more, but what more is there? And I'm always humbled by the vastness of human potential and the vastness of our unconscious.
Mm.
If you look at the research on like what the conscious mind can understand versus what's in the unconscious, it's something like we're 0.00000046% conscious.
Makes
The
sense.
numbers are wrong, but directionally it's right. And it's like every time you go into the unknown, you go into your unconscious, you go into those dark places, you're going to find vast reserves of potential, of
Hmm.
connection, of love, of all the things that we all seem to be searching for externally, but are actually just buried within us. It just takes some courage and bravery to go in there and find them. When is your event, by the way? It's coming up, right?
Yeah, it'd be February 9th through 11th. So I have another retreat that's here in St. Louis, October 20 through 23rd. It's been sold out for a while. And then the one
Nice.
that we've got in February, we've got a handful of spots left. I think a couple guest house spots and maybe like one VIP house.
Badass.
Um, and really, really excited about all that, and everything you're talking about, right? That like just being willing to walk toward it, the
Mm,
making that choice for people and giving them that first time maybe they've been able to recognize that feeling and decipher the danger from discomfort and be able to say, oh shit, we're okay to go that way. Like, in
mm,
fact, that's the way we're supposed to be going. That's where the
mm.
universe is going to ask us to respond with our best.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I felt, with the public speaking, as, met you through that world at Impact
Mm,
11.
mhm,
Um, I like the feeling that public speaking has given me for the opportunities that I've been given to do it. And it's always been so far through events my friends are running or other type
mm,
of things. or someone who was there invited me to the next thing.
Right.
But man, just like competing, I feel like it takes my best. Like it takes my
Mm.
best ability to focus. It takes my best ability to translate my story to the audience and be able to read the room enough to move and change the tone of my story as it needs be to impact the people. That's my job as the person on stage.
Mm.
And man, I love what challenge that presents internally
Yeah.
of, mastery and fluency of your own story.
Yeah, and I think it's the struggle of that that's really the beautiful piece of it. I'm have built a great business, keynote speaking, and the other things that we're doing, but it's a continued evolution for me where I'm in kind of a very similar struggle again to say, hey, well, is this really my message? Have I articulated this in the best way possible? Am I serving those listening to me in the highest order that I possibly can? And my answer to those things is always no.
Right.
But so then how do I do it better? And so I go through a process. We can talk about this more some other time as well, but on a pretty regular basis of reevaluating all of it, soup to nuts, and almost recasting or rebirthing what it is that I'm doing to reach that next level.
Well, I mean, no different than like finishing the end of a season competing for me, right? Like
Exactly.
I remember finishing up 2011 and being second in the world. And I knew like, all right, here's a
Mm,
couple spots for improvement. Right. And then after
yeah.
2012, I won and I had a moment of like, so we just do that again? Like it worked. It like, am I a dick if I don't just repeat? But of course you end up trying to edit and still, where can I optimize and not let the result speak for what you can really continue to get out of it.
Yeah. I mean, once you've arrived, there's no more growth. So I have this love-hate relationship with people that are like, "Oh, well, I'm the best in my field," or "I know myself." And it's not to diminish that. Like those things are huge accomplishments in and of themselves, right? It's something to be celebrated and really appreciated what it has taken to get to those points.
Yeah.
And at the same time, if you don't have the humility to step back and say, okay, well, where next? Where am I going to continue to grow? Then you're just stuck. You've got the award that you can put on your shelf, and that's it. I have a question for you. So after you won, did you
Hmm.
go back and compete again the next year?
Hmm. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I went to worlds every year that I was a pro.
Hmm.
Um, had kind of a weird run into becoming a pro. I got into the amateurs like 2009, 2010. I
Yeah.
won an amateur world championship. And then 2011, um, I won an amateur world championship, and kind of turning pro in the Highland Games is it's a bit
Mm.
throw your hands in the air and say, like, I'm a professional now.
Okay.
You can kind of, as long as you can get invited to places that'll pay you to compete, you're welcome to be a professional.
Fair.
Uh, that's kind of how it works. There's some ranking system for a few of the games during the year, but a lot of it is based on relationships with athletic directors that you build through the amateur time.
Got it.
Being the best in the world helps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No doubt.
being the best in the world that also is entertaining and people want at their show is better.
Mm. Hmm.
Um, so I was able to always get invites and things like that. And then 2011, I ended up winning amateur worlds again, and they had a deal where like the winner automatically got an invite to worlds the next year for the pros.
Oh, cool.
And so I was like, sweet, we're in. This is the reason we'll stay amateur again this season.
Hmm.
And what ended up happening is like on the spot at amateur worlds, they're like, how do you feel about getting to go compete at world championships? I was like, really excited about it. I've got time to train. And they're like, well, it's in 2 weeks. And I'm like, thought it was next year's worlds. And they're like, nope, you're going to Loon in New
Oh,
Hampshire in
wow.
2 weeks. And I'm like, okay, I guess that'll be our debut as a professional. We'll be at the world championships.
Wild.
And I was in good shape to throw, and I went out and gave it hell, took second.
Yeah.
And then won the following year. And then the year after that took second, and then won the following year. And then I finished up with 2 seconds.
Wow.
Um, but Yeah, it was a super fun time, and like being able to know that I've got that greatness and like that, like I knew I had it.
Yeah.
Like I don't have a better way to say it, right? That like I know that I can go perform at my best when it counts.
Yeah.
I don't know how well everyone else will throw. And if I get beaten and I throw at my best, so be it, man.
That's right.
That's the world. There are other people. Look, I'm now aware as an athlete, right, that it's not just hard work that does it. There's talent. There is
Hmm.
there is a thing that's talent.
Yep.
And in the same way of public speaking, look, um, Tony Tony Robbins, he's got it. I don't know what it is, but we've all run
Yeah.
into those people that are so charismatic that they have it.
Yep.
Um, in Highland Games, I had it.
Yeah.
I spoke that language. It was very fluent, and I could perform on demand at a very high level.
Mm.
And I want that again.
Yeah.
Like I want that feeling in here of like we're fucking good at this.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Right?
know that feeling. And I love that feeling. And I've got a lot of respect for what you've accomplished, not just physically, but like the mental, emotional strength to do that. And I think another component of it that is critical for all of us is, when you're at the top of the ladder, is you start climbing the next ladder.
Yep.
You go back at it. You were willing to go back to the games your third year and compete again. Like you put that win you had at risk.
Yeah.
And so often it's easy to kind of take the win, take the victory, however big or small it is, and then like retreat and put it on the shelf and say, "Oh, I'm done. I was a success. I was the best in the world." I mean, that one might have been enough for me, by the way. But you went back and you did it again. And that's the practice. That's the hero's journey. That's just what it takes to continue to grow. And no doubt with that expertise, that growth process that you've developed for yourself physically will, of course, bring you into the heights of the speaking world. I'm excited for it.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. And so going from public speaking to choosing to write a book, what a different
Yeah.
lane to go down, and what an other interesting challenge it is to pour your guts into pages
Yeah.
when you start comparing yourself to like, well, I wrote a book, but I'm not like an author.
Yeah. You know what was funny is for years people were telling me to write a book. And I'd be like, "Oh, well, I'm busy. Yeah, I'll do that later." And it was true. I was busy. But then the pandemic happened and my whole business
Mm,
disappears and I'm not speaking anywhere. And I'm like, "Oh, shit. I've been avoiding writing a book." Like here I am speaking about it, doing it myself. Like I caught myself in the
yeah,
act.
you're still avoiding it.
And when I caught it, I started talking to publishers the next day. I'm like, there it is. There's that tightness in the chest. There's that negative self-talk in my head. I'm doing that tomorrow.
Oh
Eh,
man, I felt so much of that going into the impact thing, and I felt so much of
Mm,
that anytime I've gotten a chance to be on stage or lead these retreats or do any of it. And it's like,
yeah.
to get this, it requires your best.
Yeah.
So be ready. And so for me, I've put in a lot of routine around like knowing how to show up as my best. Do you have
Mm,
anything that you do that way that helps get you in the right mindset of going after the thing?
yeah. I do. And I think it's important to say that whatever process anybody has doesn't matter. Right? When you show up, how you show up, that's the thing. I don't care if you have a 3 hour routine in the morning where you eat your egg whites and you do your yoga and your breathing and your meditation, or you roll out of bed and you show up on the stage, right? But it's the show up part that's important. Now, that said, I have developed a bit of a routine where the night before I spend some time reflecting on what was really great about my day. And it sounds silly, but it's important to me.
What's gratitude? Like spending
It's
time in gratitude is such a superpower to be able to choose it.
It is, and living the kind of lives that we live, and many of your listeners live, like you're uncomfortable a lot of the time. Like you're going through growth, you're putting yourself in situations that are really hard, and maybe you don't feel up to it, or maybe a little inadequate. I mean, that's certainly been my experience of it. And to be able to reflect on the day and say, okay, that was a hell of a day. It was rough. I felt like crying. I got beat up. I feel totally unqualified for whatever it is I'm doing. But what went well,
Yeah.
it builds that practice of gratitude. And so if I can go to sleep in that state, then I wake up and I actually do the same thing. I don't know if you're a morning person. I'm not.
I'm a bit of one.
It takes me a minute in the morning to be like, okay, I am going to get out of bed and I am going to have a good day. And what does that feel like? And really source that feeling within me.
Mhm.
I do like to work out in the morning. I do like to do some breathing exercises. And I do like to meditate as much as I make fun of it. But it helps me kind of ground myself in myself so I can show up not just as myself, but show up present to whatever's in front of me.
I think as much as we can spend time in the digital space and in our own heads where a lot of work is required now, that it's not like the physical 8 hours of labor that get, a thing done.
Yeah.
That it's easy for that time doesn't operate on the same scale that most of our reality does, especially not like if I need to go do a physical thing. You're like, oh, it takes a long time to go back and forth and get a project done because I have to go to Home Depot over and over again. And we're
Yeah.
so used to now things getting done really fast because of how quickly we can move and operate digitally. And I
Yeah.
do think it takes some time with meditation or cold or any of these other things with breath work to return back to that present and be able to just, man, remesh with what the reality timeline is.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. I saw something on Instagram the other day and I don't know who said it. But he said human beings are the only species that can subvert their intentions. Everything else is just doing what they're doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of those things, right? That like human beings are also the only ones that beat themselves up for yesterday's mistakes.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, no other. It's not important for any other animal.
Right. Well, and it used to be, if you go back to like caveman days, discomfort actually drove the things that you needed to do. You know, if you're
Right.
hungry,
Yeah.
you've got to go out and hunt. You're scared, you need to build a shelter, right? It's driving your behavior. And we've got, in many ways, the luxury of modern times
Mhm.
to not have to deal with that discomfort. You know, I can sit on my couch and order food and work on Zoom and be entertained on Netflix. I've got the option of avoiding those things, those messages that that discomfort is telling me, and I can push it away. And it does take some presence and it takes some peace and it takes some intention to really understand where that discomfort is guiding you and what it's telling you you need to do. Because I promise everybody that that is the path forward,
But
no
dude,
matter what it is.
share with everyone where they can find you, find your book, and I would love to do this again and continue to diving in more into deeper stuff now that we've covered the who you are and why my audience is going to hear more from you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll look forward to that for sure. All of my stuff is at sterlinghawkins.com, and I'm pretty searchable on all the social media as Sterling Hawkins.
Right on, right on.
Yeah.
And your book is Hunting Discomfort.
Book is Hunting Discomfort. You can also find that on my website, Amazon, everywhere books sold. You can also see more details on that, huntingdiscomfort.com. So thank you, Matt. Really been a pleasure and an honor to join you.
Thanks, dude. I really appreciate you, brother. Thank
Likewise.
you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.